Thank you. My name is Dawn Soto. I'm the Outreach Director at the Wisconsin Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired. We're going to talk just a little bit today about least restrictive environment. I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to learn what TVI and O&M means in Wisconsin. We're going to learn a little bit about the definition of least restrictive environment, or LRE. We're going to learn what does free and appropriate public education, or FAPE, we call it FAPE. What does that mean? And let's learn a little bit about some wide array of placement options that are available to students in Wisconsin who are blind and visually impaired. So those are our learning outcomes. So in Wisconsin, primarily when we say vision professionals, they're professionals who work with students who are blind and visually impaired, either directly or indirectly. So typically what we mean are teachers of the blind and visually impaired, or TVI, that's what we call them in Wisconsin, and orientation and mobility specialists, or O&M specialists. So I give you the statute, PI 34.051. That's actually what Wisconsin law says TVIs have to be licensed under. And these are the basically the aspects of their licensing that is required through the state. So TVIs can also be provisionally licensed, which means they might be in a training program with a university. So this may be a teacher who is a teacher of special education teacher, that's a general special education teacher, perhaps, and they are training to be a TVI. But for 3 years, they can be provisionally licensed. So there could be a TVI out there in the state, and we have many at different times as we have a teacher shortage, who would be provisionally licensed. So that is allowed for TVIs. The TVI must be included in all initial evaluations when considering the category blind and visually impaired. And the TVI also can provide what we call specially designed instruction, which is basically instruction for the student within their education program. We'll talk a little bit more about this, just a little general so you understand now. Then orientation and mobility specialists, they are under PI 34.089. I did link these, and this is in the live binder, so you can click on those to explore the law. That's the law that talks about licensing for O&M specialists. There is not, however, a provisional license is not allowed for orientation and mobility specialists. So that's important to know. That professional for O&M in Wisconsin must already have completed all of their coursework at the university and their internship. No provisional license allowed. Must also be included in all initial evaluations when the team is considering blind and visually impaired. I did add, if IEP team has sufficient information, they can add O&M as what we call a related service without a reevaluation. But this would be all part of what would be happening within the IEP team. So additionally, just important to note that the orientation and mobility specialist is considered a related service. And that's basically the categories of professionals serving students. So the TVI provides what we call specially designed instruction. The orientation and mobility specialist is in a category called related service, which means other related services that you might be familiar with might be occupational therapy, physical therapy, assistive technology, audiology. So that's just the distinction between those two. And then certified Braille transcribers. So many agencies and school districts in Wisconsin may either hire their own certified Braille transcriber. Some CISAs have a certified transcriber. Some agencies have a certified transcriber. Some school districts actually have their own. They might hire a professional. Maybe it might be an educational assistant who is interested in learning Braille and may go through the coursework. And this is important, and we'll talk a little bit more, but I wanted to throw out this acronym AIM, or Accessible Educational Materials. And as we talk more about FAPE on future slides, it's just important to know that students must have the materials on their desk at the same time as their sighted peers. And this is what we would call a FAPE obligation. So I have linked a letter from OSEP. There's an acronym, the Office of Special Education Programs at the federal level. And there's a pretty great letter that is guidance for districts and local education agencies that they must address Braille. And so that's a very important talking point. But I wanted to make sure you understood what a transcriber, a certified Braille transcriber was. So I'm going to define LRE, least restrictive environment. So it's a legal principle and a set of legal requirements found in the law, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. So under IDEA, local education agencies called LEAs, this would be at your districts, must ensure this FAPE, free and appropriate public education, that FAPE is made available to all children with disabilities. So this is the legal definition of LRE. So under LRE, and I've taken this from one of our Department of Public Instruction bulletins, which I've linked for you here on this slide. Each child must receive an individualized program, or IEP, that is specialized, and it's got instruction and support services that is appropriate to their unique educational needs. Secondly, public agencies must ensure to the maximum extent that they can that children with disabilities are educated with children who are not disabled. And then third, the strong preference in the law really says that the child will be educated using the general education curriculum in the regular education classroom. And this is a preference that is reflected through Congress as they say, and the intent for special education is a service, not a place. Later on, we'll be talking about placement determinations, but the service is the special education for the child. So we'll talk about a wide array of placement options because that place can change from minute to minute, year to year, month to month. So whenever possible, the LEA makes a special education placement. If they make it in a non-LEA program for the child to receive their FAPE, the placement must be at no cost to the parents. And this includes tuition or other fees. So as we're talking later about the Wisconsin School for the Blind and Visually Impaired as a placement option, there is no charge to families. And this is in the law about least restrictive environments. So an LEA would work with our residential school, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But I wanted you to have the link to where you could locate this information. There's a really nice PDF, an image with description of the LRE placements. So when we're talking about students who are blind and visually impaired, essentially we want to ensure that that what is taught is that anything the sighted children would typically acquire through vision, right? So for us, that would be the expanded core curriculum, 9 areas taught that are required really to be taught to students who are blind and visually impaired, should they have needs in those areas after being assessed. A variety of methods will be implemented to learn to read, to write, to acquire other skills through the ECC. A few examples might be Braille large print or regular print, perhaps using vision aids, low vision aids, perhaps a combination of methods, sometimes Braille large print, low vision aids, and other devices or computer generated speech, sometimes regular print with accommodations. And the list could really go on and on. I just wanted to put a few things out here. I've linked for you from the American Foundation for the Blind some research initiatives and the links about educating children who are blind and visually impaired, along with the law of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It's a longer read, but is very specific to blind and visually impaired students. So that will be very helpful for you to dig if you want to go a little bit more into the law about blindness and visual impairment. All right, I think I have a duplicate slide on the costs. There we go. So the free and appropriate public education means that special education, which would be like specially designed instruction that the TVI gives, and related services, one example is orientation and mobility, that those are provided at public expense, under public supervision and direction, and in accordance with the IEP. There's another acronym you probably are familiar with, the Individualized Education Program, or IEP. So FAPE must be available to all students age 3 through 21. In Wisconsin, we are a 3 through 21 is served through the Department of Public Instruction, to all students enrolled in a public school, including those students with disabilities who have been suspended or expelled from school. There is some difference with private and home schools. That is different, and the FAPE obligation does not cross over the same as it does for the student served at public expense in a public education institution. So what I've linked for you here are the FAPE Bulletin from DPI, our Accessible Educational Materials, or AIM Bulletin, and that is largely about what the LEA or district is required to do by law to make sure those students statewide have everything on their desk the same time as their sighted peers. And then the OSEP Dear Colleague Braille letter. Again, this is the federal letter that really says the default for any student who is blind and visually impaired is Braille. And we're actually then working to determine if Braille is not appropriate. We then have the requirement through the IEP to say why. So really the default is that students must have access to Braille unless the IEP team says Braille is not appropriate. So some statewide placement options and service provision. So we're going to talk today about with our panelists. Regular classroom may have support provided by an itinerant or traveling teacher or other special education teachers assigned to the school. So a regular classroom may also have services provided by the itinerant that is assigned to that school. That sometimes the traveling teacher may be housed in that school or school district or building. Other times that teacher may be traveling and only in that school a few times, maybe even once a month. Then a self-contained classroom, and we've heard a little bit about that and you'll hear more. And then also perhaps a resource classroom where maybe students come together in a classroom at certain points of the day. And then so that's sort of like a statewide look. And I've got the link to the AFB research initiatives as well. And then I'm going to talk about our Wisconsin School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. So what I wanted you to have an understanding of the Department of Public Instruction, which is what is basically provides the 3 to 21 education in Wisconsin. Under that is this Division for Learning Support. That's the team that our center, Wisconsin Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired, we are part of that team. And we've kind of got an umbrella. And under our umbrella in Janesville, Wisconsin, we have an outreach team, an Accessible Educational Materials Center, or AIM team, kind of going with that bulletin we talked about. AIM, we would help to provide research and support for learning products for students who are blind and visually impaired, or Braille or large print, help the district as they provide that out in the districts to give them research on where to purchase those things. And then the Wisconsin School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. I think they had a 173rd birthday today. They were the first public school in the state of Wisconsin ever funded, the first publicly funded school ever. So they are literally the oldest school in Wisconsin, and they are a residential state school for the blind, and many states have residential schools as well. So a little bit just about outreach so that you leave with a little bit about what what I do and our team does to support all students throughout the whole state, whether they're out in an educational placement, served by an itinerant in a resource room, or at the Wisconsin School for the Blind. We have short course programming, and I linked some information about that. We have an employability summer work program. We have statewide programs that we run, usually by people saying that they're interested in programs. That's how we get feedback and requests for programs. And then we have consultant support. We can help TVIs and O&Ms learn to do different aspects of their job. We've got parent liaison supports and research reports where we can provide research or support. And then we have low vision clinics where we schedule and contract with low vision optometrists for school age students. You could probably request just about any bit of research or anything that you might need. And I've given you the link to our OSR, our outreach service request. So this is the last you'll hear me talk, but I wanted to leave you also with our bulletin, which is called 11.01. Maria might talk a little bit about things definitely in this. This is about placement at the residential state school. And then also 2 links again for you about FAPE. That's a pretty important piece of what we talked about today, is that free and appropriate public education. So I am done speaking, and I think next up was going to be Shannon to share with us about statewide, but I'll pass it back to you, Trish.
Well, first of all, wow, that was so much information in a very short time period. And I want to make sure that if there's any questions or anything that was missed that you wanted to have Dawn expand on quickly before we moved on, let me know right away, or you can put it in the chat. That was great information, Dawn. I really appreciate it. And you're such a good speaker.
Sometimes I go a little fast, but I want to get to Shannon and Maria.
Well, I have not seen anything yet, so I will introduce Shannon Shepard first. And Shannon, how long have you actually been in the field right up to now?
This is my 16th year.
16 years. Wow, that's awesome. And I know I worked with you a few times in CISA 5 when you were itinerant teaching. And Shannon is going to talk about what it looks like as if you're getting the itinerant services, but also she has worked in a resource room, and so she has the ability to understand the difference between itinerant services and the resource room and the benefits between them both, and a little bit of the differences of what you might see. And I know that not all cities out in Wisconsin are offering resource rooms, but that is a placement that you might find. And so I really appreciate that, Shannon. So do you want to just start discussing what the itinerant services kind of look like right now and how you would get that on the IEP?
Yeah, I do have like a little slideshow for the Vision Resource Program, but I'll just start talking about the itinerant services. So,
okay.
I feel like most of us are familiar with itinerant services, and that's how most of our students are served. A TVI or O&M will come in and serve a student based off of their IEP and their needs. And a lot of times they have several districts on their caseloads. I've had up to 15 or 16 different districts that I've served within a school year. And so there's a lot of there needs to be a lot of communication, obviously, with case managers and other staff that you're working with. Some of the students require, several days a week of services, and others maybe 2 times a year of consults. So your caseloads can vary quite drastically depending on the need of services. And then also how much traveling you're doing is also a big factor in your day-to-day services that you can provide. At CESA 5, we have 35 member school districts, but we also serve outside of CESA 5. A lot of districts will contract with us for our services, whether it's geographically, close, or because some of the other CESAs or other providers may be shorter staffed. And so we look to see if we are able to do that, and hopefully we are able to, and a lot of times we will. Our day to day is, like I said, it's a lot of traveling. You're in and out, and some days you're in your car 3 to 5 hours a day. And other times you can kind of spend a lot of time within one district, depending on how many students are there and that need your services. Our days vary every day. Every day is a different day, and it does take a lot of organization and planning on our part to ensure that we're covering all of our districts and meeting our students' needs. So that would be the least restrictive option as far as having the students within their resident district and then receiving those outside services. And so right now I am an itinerant teacher, but in years past, I've also been half-time resource program teacher and half-time itinerant. So I've seen a few different options that are available to the students that we have in CESA 5. Is it okay if I share my screen now to?
That would be perfect.
Okay, thank you.
How many vision staff are at the CESA 5?
We
Right.
have 2 full-time O&M and then 1 who works specifically with our vision program students. So she's there 2 days a week. And then as far as teachers, let me think. 1, 2, 3, 4. Are we up to 6? Off the top of my head, yes. So we are very well. We hired a few last year, and we are very well set. We were struggling a little bit, I would say, in years past, but we have a really good group right now, and so therefore we are able to provide services in a lot of different areas.
Very nice.
1 second here. Okay, so this is, like I said, our CESA 5 program it's housed in the Portage School District, but it is through CESA 5. So different districts that we serve, it is an option for a placement for students to come to Portage and receive services. A lot of the students that do come to us are typically Braille students, but that does not mean that we are not open to any student who is receiving services. So we have 1 teacher in our program who's there full-time, and then the other teacher is there part of the time, and then he spends the other part of his day doing itinerant services. And then we have 3 full-time paraprofessionals, as well as there is another one who spends part of our day in our program, and then she also helps support one of our itinerant teachers in other districts. So our paras are, we train them in how to, transcribe materials, prepare tactile graphics, support the students within the classroom. Our program spans across the entire district, just depending on what grade level students are in. We do have a resource room in each building wherever there are students. So when we do get to the IEP meetings and we are looking for a little bit more intensive services, we talk about all the different options, itinerant resource program and the Wisconsin School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. The nice thing about the resource program is that students are still with peers that are sighted peers. They are mainstreamed in the classrooms, but they also have that camaraderie and connection with students who are visually impaired. And all our resources are there. The Braille production is there, the technology and access to those things. And also the staff within the district are familiar with our programming and students who are coming through. We've had a resource program for over 20 years. Right now we just have 6 students, and they're coming from a variety of districts. And Some of them travel 45 minutes to get there, some almost an hour, but we have talked about opening or trying out a new resource program in the northern portion of CSIP 5, but that has not happened as of yet. But so right now, all that we have is in the Portage School District. I had created this for a different group. Obviously, you guys, a TVI would provide an O&M and then our paraprofessionals, but we're all working obviously towards the same things, providing that instruction in low vision skills, Braille, assistive technology, and then O&M comes in and has their role as well. I think one of the biggest things is having that consistent person on site, and also the paraprofessionals that are trained in working with students who are visually impaired. That seems to be a highlight, I feel like, of the program, just because sometimes as an itinerant teacher, you definitely have to offer that extra training for those that are working with our students who are visually impaired. And sometimes having somebody on site can be beneficial versus somebody who's coming in and out throughout the week. And with our students, we do daily living skills meetings. So the staff will meet and then the students get together and focus on aspects of the expanded core. We also have community outings and then larger group events. So it kind of centers around our resource program, but we do pull in students from all across CSIP 5 to come participate in a larger group event. And so this is an example of some of them. The top left picture is those of, it was just a regular daily living skills outing. Recreation and leisure was kind of the focus. And then the other one was at Beat Baseball. Those students are in our program, but we also brought in other students from CSIP 5. And then at the bottom of the page is, again, our resource program, but we had students from all over CSIP 5 participate in a White Cane Day event that we had held. And then lastly, this is just a quote that we had asked a parent to kind of give her perspective on having her son in our resource program. I actually started with him when he was in early childhood, and now he's a senior. And he's been on our resource program since kindergarten or first grade. And so she's very thankful for it. Again, it kind of is an in-between placement option where students are around their sighted peers, but also get the opportunity to be around other students who are visually impaired.
So in the resource room, having the wide range of age groups,
Yes.
is it beneficial for the younger ones to work with the older ones? Do you ever have them peer team together, just with different subjects, or help understanding, or get through issues or problems?
Yeah, I feel like when I've led the daily living skills meetings that we've had, a lot of time it's just nice for them to talk to each other. And like right now there's 5 in the high school and 1 in the middle school, so they don't see each other except for that one time a week. But it's kind of like their own little family too. And so they've come to know each other, and yeah, they'll just talk about their day, or, what it's like, and, different experiences that they have. And so it is nice to see them be able to have those open conversations.
What's the youngest age that went into the resource room?
We have had first grade is the youngest we have had.
Okay.
It seems like a lot of times they'll do early childhood and, and then through kindergarten within the resident district. And then as we're looking towards really pushing more of that Braille instruction and other things, that it has served them well to come around first grade.
Okay.
Unless, of course, they've had experienced vision loss partway through, like middle school or so. But
Have you ever had any students express an interest to go from just getting itinerant services into the resource room, or vice versa? The resource room, a child requesting just to be itinerant if they're living out of town?
No, not really. I would say
No.
one of the barriers, though, is because they aren't around the peers that they actually live by. That can be a drawback. Just because they're not connected to their community so much in that way. But I haven't had them, really express that before.
Okay. And do you find a parent would request one or the other at the IEP meetings when they start talking about different placements?
No, I don't feel like the parents know that much about the resource program. So when we bring it up, there's a lot of hesitation because one, they don't really know about it. So we do they can come in and check it out and visit and see what it looks like. And I also think that there's a fear that their child will be completely separated from all the other students, which isn't the case. It's just a part of their day for the one-on-one instruction. But
Okay.
like I said, there is some hesitation because they are being brought away from, their residential district. But I feel like those that have been in the program have seen the benefits and are really grateful for it. So
Nice. So as a special ed director piece that you've also played a part in, is there, I don't know how to word this, but is there any advice or tips on other communities being able to start a resource room? Is there a direction or like a request, or if they have, so many visually impaired kids in, their district or in the surrounding districts around them? Is there, I know there's a lot of areas that could probably benefit from having a resource room, on how to even request that to their district.
I feel like there would be based on some of the concentration of students that we have in some of our districts, that's kind of why I had mentioned the northern area of CESA 5. Like it's been talked about, but actually getting it started, there's obviously costs involved as well for a district to pay for a student to attend the program. But there's also costs to have, a high amount of itinerant services, and then to also train your staff. So I feel like there is some hesitation, and I know because it isn't the least restrictive environment that might be part of it as well. But I think that there are some good benefits to it as well.
Okay. Are there any indication of, or any typical kids that you would assess and you would know, okay, this is a student that would definitely benefit from the resource room, or this is a student that would definitely benefit from just itinerant services?
Yeah, I have some right now that if there was a resource program probably within the area, I would maybe recommend it. I do feel like the higher intensive Braille services lend itself well to the resource program, just because the resources are there to create it and the staff to help create it. So yeah, there are certain ones that we bring it up and maybe recommend it a little bit more than others, but it is definitely a placement option for anybody. But
nice. And what about the transition area, the time frames when they're transitioning from either early childhood to the academic classrooms or from the 18 to the 21 program?
As far as like within the resource program or just in general?
Is there, is it, trying to come up with the words, do you work with the students more in the resource room or the itinerant, or does it make a difference with the transition programs?
It doesn't make a difference. I feel like most the students that I've worked with as far as like post high school or, you know, after 12th grade that have been in the resource program, either we have worked with them, you know, more in their homes and then within their resident district.
Okay.
Actually, you know, towards the end of high school, we start, or we work on those things all along. But when it comes, like some people will walk at graduation with their class, but then I've worked with them, like I said, in their homes and community, in their resident area. As far as like early childhood to kindergarten, most of the time those students have stayed in their resident district. And then after kindergarten, we've talked about the resource program.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you, Shannon. Is there any other questions regarding the resource room or itinerant services? I'm not seeing anything in the chat. You really covered a lot. So, but we'll move on to the Wisconsin School for the Blind and Visually Impaired with Maria Schoville. And Maria will talk about what that looks like as a placement at the School for the Blind and the benefits that she can see with this placement and the decisions of when that placement is right for a student and when it's not. Maria, thank you.
Thanks, Trisha. So I'm not going to share my screen just because I have a lot of words. What happens is I usually start with a phone call. So I do a lot of talking anyway. So like Shannon mentioned, placement at the school starts with an IEP team meeting. So it is discussed with a team. Most often I get a phone call from a parent or someone in the district who's wondering what placement looks like, how it happens, and how it can occur. We recommend that everyone starts with a tour. Most families need to see our building. Our building is very large. It's, you know, a quarter mile from one side of the campus to the other. We have a lot of services here, and we want them to be able to feel comfortable if they're sending their child here. So we start with talking about a tour. After a tour, then we would start with an IEP team meeting. So whether it's the parent or the team that's requesting us, usually I attend. And then as the IEP coordinator and a teacher of students with visual impairments, and then our dean of students, Dawn Soto, and then Julie Piper, our education specialist, we usually attend, sometimes a nursing supervisor if there's nursing services that are involved in the IEP. But we talk about what our programming looks like. So we'll talk about what services the student needs, what goals they're working on, why we think this would be a good choice for a placement. And then we talk about a trial. So everyone starts as with a trial. Typically, we start at the beginning of the school year or beginning of a quarter or semester, just because those are natural transitions, starting when a schedule might change. So for most often with high schoolers, that's the easiest. You know, you're talking credits and trying to maintain credits. We can start at any time, but those are the easiest times. So we talk about when a trial placement would start. And that trial usually lasts between 30 and 45 days, so about a typical school quarter. And then during that placement, we look at all kinds of different things. We're looking at assessing how the student does in our setting versus what the student was doing in the district. So we look at the daily living skills. We're looking at developing relationships with peers and staff. We're looking at how they're doing being away from home. If they're a residential student, they arrive on Sunday night and they go home on Friday afternoons. So sometimes that can be a long time for a student. We do have students that are day students that come to and from school every day. So depending on what that looks like, it may be different. But we look at all the ECC, so the expanded core curriculum. So specifically, we're looking at those independent living and orientation and mobility and assistive technology. Those are the top three. And then, of course, like Dawn was mentioning, the accessible materials. So we look at whether we're needing large print or Braille. And then those are provided on a daily basis within all classes. So we look at all of those. Then the team gets back together at the end of the trial. And I am talking rather quickly. I talk fast. So by all means, ask questions later when we get to that, if I skip anything. But at the end of that trial, we get together. And so we meet with the staff at WSBVI. And we meet with the staff from the district and the family and the student. And we talk about all those things that we were seeing. So we're talking about, is the student making friends? Is the student participating in extracurriculars? Is the student making gains on their IEP goals that was set on the district IEP that they came with? Does this look like a good placement? Would we recommend it? So our staff will make recommendations for what services would look like and what goals we would support while they're here. The district and the family would talk about how it went from their side. And then we would determine where placement would go from there. So sometimes students stay, sometimes students go back to their district. Sometimes we talk about shared placements. If a student lives close enough, we can have different types of placements. If they're close enough that we can split days, we can have mornings and afternoons, a couple classes here and there. We can have split days of the week, depending on programming. This is not always ideal because curriculums are different at different schools. So depending on the grade and age and services of a child, we may not be able to split days, but sometimes people are here for 2 days or 3 days a week, and then they're in their home district for 2 or 3 days a week. So we do talk about all those different options. Then I'm just trying to figure out where I'm at. So when we talk about whether a student is a residential or a day student, and if that placement was continuing that way, that can also be considered. When we're looking at a student who lives close, we might be looking at what are we recommending for independent living skills. Maybe they really would benefit from a dorm residential, being a dorm student in residential, but they do live very close. Maybe they live so far away that they're on the plane here every weekend and there isn't a choice but to fly in. We do have both. So those kinds of things are all talked about at the meeting, and then whether or not the placement would continue. So when we talk about placement as a whole, that's how a student would get here. So our programming, it is an open door. So our placement at our school, while we go through a trial and we say, yes, the student should stay, that doesn't mean they're going to be here every year. Maybe it's right now. Maybe it's a good fit right now, but maybe in 2 years, they need to go back to their school because they need to get more involved in their community. Maybe they're an elementary school student and then they're just filling in some gaps if they had some vision loss, and then they're going back to their school because they gained more skills and they feel more comfortable and ready to be in a public school setting where they are doing all those things. So it's an open door. We meet every year, more than that if needed, because you can call an IEP meeting at any time. But we talk about those options at the meeting. So whether or not they should continue the way they are. And then we serve students from ages 3 to 21. So just like in public school and special ed, students that are preschool to high school to transition, we can serve all of those ages. So the programming, again, would look different based on the student need. The 18 to 21-year-old program is our transition program. We call it College and Career Readiness. And so again, I know I'm talking really fast, but Shannon had mentioned something about a student walking. So we have that same here. So as long as a student does not accept a diploma, they can walk with their school, and they could come here for our transition program. And during that transition program, they have completed their high school credits, and then they're focusing on the transition skills, and they're forming connections with adult resources. They also would have the opportunity, if they had gone through the trial placement and they were continuing. We have students that take a class at the University of Whitewater at URUC. It's a mouthful, but they can take a class over there and try to see what college looks like, or they can take a class at Blackhawk Technical College and they can see what college is like stepping into it while they're being supported by us and the services at this college. So we're helping them go through and saying, you need to contact disability services, and maybe they need a little support with that, but they're learning that college step. So that can be a really good thing. They can still work with DVR. So sometimes they're working with DVR. Department of Vocational Rehabilitation. Sorry, it's the acronyms that get me that I use all the time. But sometimes a student is connected with their home county DVR. Sometimes they're connected in Rock County, depending on when they want to work. If they want to work during the school week, it might be more beneficial to be connected with Rock County DVR. If they're only working on weekends when they're home, then they might connect with their home DVR, or if they're working in the summer. But both DVR services will work together regardless. They'll make sure that those meetings are happening and that they're being connected. So with our placement, we have, there are concerns, but there are a lot of benefits. So I'm going to talk about the concerns first, because I think that when I talk about the benefits, I'll cover those. So the first concern that most people have is, wow, that is a restrictive placement. Everyone there has a visual impairment. It is a special ed school. You are contained, and there's not as many students. There's not your same age peers. But when you look at that, yes, it is restrictive. However, there are many options for it to be the least restrictive placement. So I'll talk a little bit about that and the benefits. The other, another concern might be the distance from home. So depending on the age of a student might not be ready to be here because they're too far away from home, or a parent might not be ready for them to be here. So that we've seen both of those things. Some are medical appointments during the week. Sometimes if you live far away, a student can't come back and forth during the week when they have a medical appointment in the middle of the week. Those are the biggest concerns I think that get raised. So when I talk about the benefits, I'll review those. So when they're here, the chance for independence is greater most often than a public school as far as travel within the school. When you're in a public school, I see a lot of students who have come here, they have had a one-on-one aide. And so when they're in a school, they have someone helping them from class to class. And I know this is not the way it is with everyone, but a lot of the students that we see that come have had this. They have a one-on-one aide in their classes. They have a one-on-one aide who's helping them travel. Or when you're in a public school, you have a lot of sighted peers, so they can see you coming. And so they will move out of the way naturally. When you are in our school, the students will travel and they are all sighted, they're all visually impaired. And so they're learning to navigate around each other. They're all learning their cane skills. They're all learning their orientation and mobility and directional. And I am not an O&M instructor, I sometimes use the wrong words, so anybody can free to correct me. But when they're learning to travel in our setting, so they can have that greater sense of independence. They can also have a greater sense of independence with independent living skills. So in the dorm, they're expected to keep their room clean. That may look different. The level of independence will look different depending on the student, but it has to be clean. We can't walk in there and have everything all over the floor. And you have to know where your things are and you have to keep it clean. Students help with laundry. So they are doing laundry every week. They might be helping with cooking activities if they're doing a dorm activity in the evening and cooking. And then they have those skills here. So then other opportunities for independence, they can advocate easier. They know that there's a TVI or an O&M person. So if they're having a question, they can say, hey, can I talk to my TVI? Can I talk to my O&M? And they can go ask a question. If they're having a problem with their technology, they have people that are here. So they might be able to go get that question answered within a minute, or, not within a minute, but quickly. We might say, hey, can the assistive technology teacher pop into our classroom? Sure. So they might be able to get that done. So other things, so I kind of skipped around a little bit, but benefits. So we're talking about, as with that resource, the Vision Resource Program, that there's peers with similar conditions and similar concerns and vision needs. So they're all talking about how they're accessing their materials. Hey, how do you use VoiceOver on an iPad? How do you use a screen reader? They're all learning the same thing when they're here. So they have peers that are learning the same things. We talked about, I talked a little bit about the greater independence with school travel. We do have educational aides. Some in public schools, they're often called paras. We do have educational aides in most classrooms, not all, but most. They're not assigned one-on-one, but they're there for support as far as if something was needed, but they do step back. We have posters all over the school that say 19 ways to step back, stepping back and letting that student have more independence. There's a greater availability of technology. And so we have a lot of technology pieces. WCBVI does have a technology loan program. So often districts are requesting materials and sending them that. We have that material here. So sometimes that's a greater benefit. And then we have Braille materials. So we have Braillists that work over in outreach, so we can send something to them, with our request. Otherwise, we can have our TVIs that are doing it here. So sometimes that Braille material can be produced quicker. We talked about the TVIs and the O&Ms that are available through the day. One of the things that would happen most likely is that when a student is placed here, those services would increase. So sometimes when you're talking an O&M in a district, they may see a student for a larger chunk of time to work on skills, where here they might see a student once a week. So they're working on different skills throughout during a week, but then they might have some longer lessons. In Janesville, we do have a lot of transportation opportunities for our city bus. The bus goes right by our school, so that's a nice thing. And then we have a lot of different types of intersections. Again, I'm not an O&M instructor, so I can't speak to all of them. But when they're talking about roundabouts and IEP goals, I know that they're doing all the things. So, and then when we think about the dorms, we have social opportunities in the dorms. So they take trips. They might go to a trampoline park. They might go to a farm during the fall. They might they have a pizza party at the Elks Club in December. That's an annual thing. So they do different things in the dorm. During the week, they might have a karaoke night. One of the things they had going was a Pokemon club. That was pretty big for a while. They might have a swim night, an open gym, game nights. So those social opportunities with other students in the evening. They also have work time, so they have time to do their schoolwork as well. Extracurriculars would be another one. So during the school year, we have different seasons, just like a public school would. So we have track, goalball, wrestling. So our wrestling and cheer season goes together, and then swim. And while forensics isn't a sport, they do travel with our swim team. So they think they go compete against other schools for the blind, or the other schools come here. So that's another opportunity for them. They meet other students with visual impairments that are in other states. So they have those social opportunities there. A couple of the states, Ohio, Illinois, Minnesota, Kentucky. So some of those places. They just recently went to Kentucky for the conference for cheer and wrestling. And then while they're here, we also have all the therapy services and the contracted services that they would need. So we have OTPT, so that's occupational therapy, physical therapy, SLP, which is speech and language pathology, and then MT, which is music therapy. So that's not always one that is available in a public school. And then if needed, we have deaf and hard of hearing services and audiology services. And then one other thing that I mentioned as a concern was that medical appointments. So one of the things many of you probably know, we were closed for a year during COVID, a year plus. But during that time, we did have virtual learning. And so we've gotten pretty good at virtual learning. So we have a lot of support that we can give to students. So if they cannot attend for a short-term absence, so maybe they have a medical appointment in the middle of the week and they live 4 hours away, and they can't travel, we can help them attend during that time, so they're not missing as much of their instruction. So like I said, I talk a lot. And so there's a lot of things that I could go over. While I've been here for 8 school years, my parents both graduated from here and then came back to work here. So I've been around the school for a long time. So I do know quite a bit of its history. And over the years, it has looked very different. And the graduating classes years ago used to be much higher, and they're doing so well providing services around the state that it's not always the right placement for every student, but I do think that it's a really great placement for a lot of students when it's the right time. So if the IEP team agrees and they think, I think it's a great thing, we set up a trial and we see how it goes. But there's a lot of opportunity here as well. And so we want to be there to support the districts out in the state, and then however we can. So if anybody has any questions, let me have them.
We do have Missy who would love a copy of the 19 Ways to Step Back poster.
I will have to go, I can go look to see where that's from. I know it's not we didn't create that, it's from somewhere, but I will definitely look for you and find it. Yes, a photo. Yep, we can do that too. It's a really long one, like we hang it on doors. So, so maybe 2 photos, but yes, I will get it for you.
So can you let everyone know what the youngest age would be that would be staying in the dorm in the past?
So historically, probably 5, but in the most recent years, the youngest one we've probably had is 10. And again, it's really on a student by student consideration. I think that depending on how far they are, and if they're ready to be gone, I've had some older students that we've had here who weren't ready to be gone from their parents. I've had some older students who weren't ready. Their parents weren't ready for them to be gone, and they were getting services in their district, and they felt that it was okay to go to be in the district for those services. But I would say probably 8 to 10. It's not that a 5-year-old couldn't. It's just that there's not as many young students. So I think because there's not as many younger students, it would be a little harder.
Have you ever had a situation where either the child would fight to come to the school or the parent would fight to come to the school, even though the IEP team determined that a different placement was better?
I have been a part of meetings. So we are not a part of the team. We are, as staff at WCBVI, we are a part of the team once the student is agreeing to come here. So we go into the meeting, and if the team says, I don't think this is a good fit, that I have had parents contact me and ask me about that, say, I really want my student to come here. And I steer them towards parent advocate groups, because, and to follow that, when they're disagreeing, like to follow up with the mediation and things like that, to talk to their team, because most of the time the team has a good reason about why. It could be because the district has the services available. It could be because they feel that the services here are not appropriate because they don't need that intensive service. But yes, I have had that in the past, and some have followed up with meetings. I have encountered where a district may be unsure because they've never sent anybody out of the district, but just because they haven't doesn't mean that they can't or that they shouldn't. And so I have had that, and I have had districts change their mind after the parents have talked to them more. So I've seen it both ways.
And what about a student? Has a student ever fought to come here when the parents and the team weren't ready for them to leave, to be around other members that are blind or visually impaired?
I've had some students who are very eager, who say, I'm coming here before the IEP team has said yes. So I have had that before. But most of the time I haven't had any arguments or anything like that, or disagreements. Most of the time they're on board for both. And
what about the opposite? So a student comes and finishes the 45-day trial period and is now fully into the routine of the WCBVI school, and then decides that he wants to go back to the district. How does that work, or has that ever happened?
It has happened.
Okay.
It has happened with students who have been here longer, and they have wanted to go back to their district. Sometimes it's been because they want to be at home with their family. Other times they have had disagreements, and it turns out that maybe it was more like a disagreement between students, and it happens just like siblings. So that does happen when students are here and they're living here for the week. They feel more like a brother-sister relationship kind of thing. That they're more like siblings, they're like family, they're living together and going to school together. So sometimes we've had some disagreements, but then it turns into nothing. They say, I want to go home this week, but then next week they're fine. But I have had students that have requested, and we've talked about it, and what we tell them, because it has, in this instance, I've experienced it with minors. So, we talk about it, that they are a voice on their IEP team, and we do take their opinions into consideration, and we do talk about that, and we do document that in student concerns in the IEP, and the parent concerns. Ultimately, we tell them, we do want to hear that, and we do want to hear you and talk about why. But right now, your parents and your IEP team feel that this is the best placement for you. So I haven't had any that have turned around because of that. But we do talk about that extensively. So it's not just at the meeting. We follow up with that concern later too.
Okay. And this is for both you and Shannon, this question. So how does it work with an itinerant teacher that has a child on their caseload and is also placed at WCBVI? How do you guys work together with that student?
So I've experienced many different ways. And I've worked with Shannon a few times. So it's so we have that. So the LEA is always a part of an IEP team. So right away, when we have a student placed here, the LEA is a requirement. Some LEAs have their TVI attend the IEP meeting every year. Others do not. Others just take the information. They may share it from the CISA side. I don't always know what that looks like and what they still contract from. When they say, well, our student is placed, well, so you don't quite need our services. So I don't know what that contract stuff looks like. But if it's a shared placement, then we're communicating more often. We're both at the IEP meetings. I have a shared placement right now where we have a document that we go back and forth with. And so that team and our team are communicating constantly. So it just depends on the placement and the need for that student. So I'll let Shannon talk about that too.
Yeah, I've been both a teacher and a director on a shared student in the past. So yes, definitely regular communication. A student that I'm thinking of had attended a few days at WSBVI and then a few days in his another placed program. And so as a teacher, obviously keeping communication with the staff at WSBVI and then the case managers in the resident district. But then as a director, it's pretty similar as well, just making sure that we're all in attendance at the IEP meetings and can, maintain that communication. If it's a student that is placed 100% of the time at WSBVI, I feel like we are involved or we're asked to attend those IEP meetings at the annual ones, but as far as when it comes to regular day-to-day stuff, since the placement is outside of our area, we don't necessarily have that frequent communication.
And who does the assessments when it's shared or if they're fully placed at WCBVI?
Well, technically the resident district is supposed to provide the assessments just for any outside placement programs. And I know the student that Maria and I are probably thinking of, there was a little bit of a shared assessment just because he had been in Janesville, but he was also in our program too. So I think it was kind of a collaboration, which would make sense if they're in two different locations. But if they're primarily in one place, I feel like it's harder for a resident district to provide that assessment if they aren't really familiar with the student, but technically they are responsible to be able to provide that.
So with assessments, there's two different types. And so when we talk about statewide assessments, or if we're talking about like 3-year evaluation type assessments. Yeah. So there are, when we talk about that, so heading into state assessment season, which every student and teacher loves, so we do handle most of the assessments for our students who are here full time. So any statewide assessment, so forward ACT, pre-ACT, dynamic learning maps, we provide the accommodations and do those assessments here. When it comes to 3-year evaluations, again, if it's a shared student, we're both doing them, but most of the time, if it's a student who is here full time, then we're doing the assessments here, but we involve the district, we have, one where we have a review of data meeting, and then we invite them to the review of data meeting, and then we talk about that. We're talking about evaluations that had been done in the past, and then moving forward with those. So once paperwork management, if a student is placed at the school for more than 50% of the time, then we manage the paperwork at the state school. If the student is primarily 3 days or more at their home district, then the paperwork is managed by the home district.
Okay. And we do have a cost to attend WCBVI in the chat. And then Dawn has something.
Yeah. And so the only cost to attend, so there is the transportation cost. So transportation is provided by the LEA. So that can look different depending on where the student is coming from and what the distance and how they're traveling. So we have students that are day students that can be brought by their district, could be brought by their parents and maybe reimbursed by the district. It just depends on what that agreement between the parent and the district is. A residential student, we have students who are on contracted buses. So the district pays the contracted cost of the busing, and they come on Sundays and go home on Fridays. We also have districts that have contracted their own transportation, and they have students who come on Monday mornings and then go home on Fridays. But that is the only cost to the district, is that.
Okay. And Dawn, you have a few links in the chat. Did you want to discuss what they are?
I found the 19 ways to step back. So it's from Perkins School for the Blind. So the second link I popped in is the Perkins link. The first link is someone else who had kind of adapted it and it made it kind of like a printable one page. So I thought that might be nice too. So.
And Missy says, thank you.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's great to hear this discussion. And I think that the one thing that is probably most important, regardless of placement decision, is just the exploration of every placement option available when we're talking about the placement page. And sometimes in the IEP process, it can be missed, or sometimes LEAs might not even understand or know some of the placement options that are available. And like Shannon shared, maybe there is not a resource room, but you know, maybe people don't know the Wisconsin School for the Blind is available or what it's about. And that's why they invite Maria then as the IEP coordinator to discuss, would that be the right option? In some states, someone from the residential school attends every IEP meeting. Every state is different. In some states, all the vision services are provided, and all the TVIs and O&Ms work for the same entity. And regardless of whether they're served in their residential state school or statewide, they kind of like, they don't have a CISA model like we do with cooperative service agencies. So every state is just very different. But, you know, biggest distinction is that we're an IEP team decision state. Some states are a parent decision state. The parent can say where the placement is. And in this one, in our state, you know, that decision is made by the IEP team together. So, but I think those are the biggest things, making sure that you're assessing every placement option at the, you know, kind of happens at the end of that IEP meeting, right? Like you've got the whole plan written, and now where can that, you know, placement decision happen? And actually there's a nice little graphic DPI has about that. So I will just pop that in the chat as well. It is in my presentation and I didn't click to go into it, but it's a one pager about determining LRE to have like to guide the discussion. So anyway, I popped that into.
Thank you. Shannon, have you ever had a family that requested an additional IEP meeting to discuss placement after the placement was already discussed? Change of mind type of thing?
Not that I can recall.
Okay.
I don't think I have.
I have.
Have you?
So yeah, sometimes I've had where the student was the opposite, where they were split placement and they were requesting the whole placement here.
Oh,
So I
okay.
have had changes that way.
I don't see any other questions or any more questions in the chat. Does anybody have any other questions? It's almost 7:30 now. Thank you all so much. Dawn, Maria, and Shannon, you guys were amazing and threw out a lot of information.